Roughly 2,500 years ago, in the palace of the most powerful empire on earth, four young men ran what may be the very first recorded diet experiment in human history. The king of Babylon wanted them fed from his own royal table, rich meat and fine wine, the best of everything. But a young man named Daniel asked for something almost laughably humble instead. "Give us pulse to eat," he said, "and water to drink, just for 10 days, and then judge for yourself." Pulse simply meant plants, the humble seeds and legumes of the field. 10 days later, the Bible tells us their faces looked healthier and better nourished than all the young men who had eaten the king's delicacies. And the story is written down in the very first chapter of the book of Daniel for anyone to read. Now sit with that for a moment, because here is a number that should stop you cold. Today, most adults eat only about 16 grams of fiber a day, which is roughly half of what the body actually needs. Half. And fiber is not the boring, forgettable thing you were taught it was. It is not just about keeping you regular. Inside your gut live trillions of tiny microbes, and when you feed them the right kind of fiber, they ferment it into compounds called short-chain fatty acids, one of which, butyrate, actually nourishes the cells that line your colon and helps calm inflammation from the inside. Researchers have even found that people who eat 30 or more different plants a week carry a far richer, more diverse community of these helpful microbes than people who eat only a handful. So the question is not really whether fiber matters. The question is why almost nobody talks about the fact that the richest, most time-tested sources of it are sitting right there in the pages of the Bible, in the very foods that fed prophets, kings, and shepherds for thousands of years. And that is exactly where we are going today. I am going to walk you through 9 of these biblical fiber foods, counting them down one by one. Foods you very likely already have in your kitchen, or could buy this week without spending much at all. Along the way, I am going to show you the actual verses, the real history, and the surprising science behind each one. In plain language, the way one friend explains something to another over a cup of tea, never rushed and never talking down to you. And I want you to pay very close attention to number 4, because it is the one almost nobody thinks of as a fiber food at all, even though it may be the most concentrated of them all. And when we reach number 2, I am going to tell you the almost unbelievable true story of a single seed that sat in darkness for 2,000 years, and then, in the hands of modern scientists, came back to life. That story alone is worth staying for. So let us begin, gently and in order, with number 9. Number 9 is the almond, and there is a reason it opens our list. In the book of Numbers, when God wanted to settle forever which man he had chosen to lead his people, he had each leader lay down a simple wooden staff overnight. In the morning, only one had changed. Aaron's rod had not just sprouted, it had budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds, all in a single night, as told in Numbers chapter 17. Almonds were so treasured that when the patriarch Jacob sent a desperate gift to Egypt to save his family from famine, in Genesis chapter 43, almonds were among the choicest fruits of the land he chose to send. And what a choice they turned out to be. A small handful of almonds, just an ounce, carries around 3.5 grams of fiber, along with vitamin E, magnesium, and the kind of healthy fats that many studies suggest may support a healthy heart. For someone in their 60s or 70s, that little handful does something quietly wonderful. It gives you steady energy without a sugar crash. It supports strong bones through its minerals, and the chewing itself, the slow, deliberate chewing of a real whole food, tells your body you are eating, so you feel satisfied sooner. My gentle suggestion is the simplest one possible. Keep a small dish of raw, unsalted almonds where you can see it, and eat just a small handful in the late afternoon, when the temptation to reach for something sweet is strongest. It is a very old food, doing a very modern job. But almonds are only the beginning, and the next one has been sewn into the holiest garments in Scripture. That brings us to number 8, the pomegranate, a fruit so honored that God Himself commanded it be embroidered onto the robe of the high priest. In the book of Exodus, chapter 28, the hem of Aaron's sacred robe was to be ringed with pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet, with tiny golden bells between them, so that holiness and beauty moved together as he walked. When King Solomon built the temple, the tops of its 2 great bronze pillars were carved with hundreds of pomegranates, described in 1 Kings chapter 7. And when the 12 spies returned from the Promised Land carrying proof of its richness, in Numbers chapter 13, they brought back grapes, figs, and pomegranates. This is one of the 7 species by which the land of Israel itself is praised, in Deuteronomy chapter 8. There is a beautiful old tradition that says every pomegranate contains exactly 613 seeds, one for each of the commandments in the Torah. Now, I will be honest with you the way a good friend should, because you are not a child, and you deserve the truth. When people actually sit down and count, the number varies wildly, anywhere from 200 to well over 1,000. But the meaning behind the tradition is lovelier than any exact count, the idea that a single fruit can be packed to bursting with goodness, and nutritionally, it truly is. A single cup of those glistening ruby seeds delivers around 7 grams of fiber, plus a remarkable concentration of plant compounds called polyphenols, which researchers around the world are studying for the way they may support the heart and help the body handle everyday inflammation. Here is a curiosity almost no one knows. Ancient Egyptians prized these fruits so highly that records show they imported pomegranates from the land of Israel more than 3,000 years ago, and they were even buried with them for the journey into the next life. My suggestion is to eat the actual seeds, not just the juice, because the fiber lives in the seeds. Scatter them over yogurt or a salad, and let a little ancient royalty brighten an ordinary lunch. And speaking of ordinary meals made mighty, our next food fed thousands with almost nothing. Now we arrive at number 7, barley, the quiet grain of the common people. When Ruth, the widow who would become the great-grandmother of King David, needed to survive, she gleaned in the barley fields, as told in the book of Ruth. And when a great crowd of 5,000 grew hungry with no food in sight, it was a small boy's 5 barley loaves, in the 6th chapter of John, that became the miracle everyone remembers. Barley was never the food of the rich. It was the food of the faithful, the ordinary, the enduring, and modern science has quietly caught up to what those people lived on. Barley is unusually rich in a special soluble fiber called beta-glucan. In fact, the evidence is strong enough that the United States Food and Drug Administration allows foods with enough of it to carry an official statement that getting about 3 grams of beta-glucan a day from oats or barley, as part of a diet low in saturated fat, may reduce the risk of heart disease by helping to lower cholesterol. Read that again slowly, because it is rare for a regulator to allow a food to say anything of the kind. For an older body, this soluble fiber does something gentle and steady. It forms a soft gel in the digestive tract that helps slow the rise of blood sugar after a meal and helps you feel comfortably full. The easiest way to bring it back into your life is to stir a handful of pearl or hulled barley into your next pot of vegetable soup, the way your grandmother very likely once did, letting it simmer until it turns tender and creamy. It costs almost nothing, and it turns a thin broth into something that holds you for hours. And now, having spoken of a food that fed a hungry crowd, let me tell you about a food that once brought a dying man back from the edge. Because that is number 6. Number 6 is the fig. And no fruit in Scripture carries more human drama. Picture a scene from the first book of Samuel, chapter 30. David's men are crossing the harsh desert when they find a man collapsed in the dirt, an Egyptian servant, abandoned by his master, so far gone that he cannot speak. He has had no food and no water for 3 days and 3 nights. They give him water, and then they give him a cake of pressed figs and some clusters of raisins, and the Scripture says, his spirit came back to him, he revived. A simple cake of figs helped pull a man back from the very door of death. Figs appear again in a story of a king's sickness, when the prophet Isaiah instructs that a poultice of figs be laid on King Hezekiah's inflamed sore. In 2 Kings chapter 20, an ancient remedy remembered across the generations, though of course we lean on our doctors for such things today. Why did figs mean survival to the ancient world? Because they are extraordinarily dense with nourishment. Dried figs carry close to 10 grams of fiber for every 100 grams, along with calcium and potassium, minerals that matter enormously for bones and for a steady heart as we age. For anyone whose digestion has grown a little slow and stubborn over the years, and if that is you, please know there is no shame in it. Figs have been trusted for thousands of years as one of the gentlest ways to keep things moving comfortably and naturally. My favorite way to enjoy them is to take 2 or 3 dried figs and let them soak overnight in a small glass of water. By morning they are plump and soft, easy to eat, and you can drink the sweet water too. It is a small ritual, but there is something grounding about eating the very same fruit that revived a fainting man in the wilderness 3,000 years ago. And let me pause here, right in the middle of our journey, because I want to tell you one more story, and this one is close to my heart. There was a prophet named Elijah, and he had just won the greatest victory of his life. And yet, the very next day, he was so exhausted, so frightened, and so worn down, that he walked out into the wilderness, sat under a solitary broom tree, and asked God to let him die. Perhaps you know a version of that feeling. Perhaps you have had a season, maybe recently, when your body was simply empty and your spirit had nothing left to give. Here is what God did for his tired prophet in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings. He did not send a lecture. He did not send a rebuke. He sent sleep, and then he sent food. An angel touched him and showed him a cake of bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water, and told him gently, "Get up and eat." Elijah ate and slept, and the angel came a second time with the same simple meal, and said something I find almost unbearably tender. "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." And the Scripture says that in the strength of that food he went on for 40 days and 40 nights. Not a feast, not medicine. Bread and water and rest, given by a God who understood that sometimes the most spiritual thing a weary person can do is eat a good, honest meal and sleep. I tell you this because everything on this list today is, in the end, that same quiet mercy, real food, given by a Creator who made your body and knows exactly what restores it. So if you are tired today, take this as your gentle permission to be fed. And now, restored and reminded, let us continue to number 5. Number 5 is the chickpea, one of the humble beans folded into a single, remarkable verse we will return to at the very end of this list. Chickpeas and their cousins were among the everyday staples of the biblical world, the sort of food that filled the cooking pots of ordinary families across the hills of Judea, and they are a genuine powerhouse. A single cup of cooked chickpeas carries around 12 grams of fiber nearly half of what many people need in an entire day, along with a generous helping of plant protein, which becomes more important, not less, as we grow older and work to hold on to our strength and our muscle. That combination of fiber and protein does something your body will thank you for. It keeps your blood sugar rising slowly and gently, rather than spiking and crashing, which means steadier energy through the afternoon and fewer of those sudden, gnawing cravings. The easiest way to enjoy them is as hummus, that smooth, ancient spread of blended chickpeas spooned onto whole grain bread, or scooped up with slices of cucumber and carrot. It is inexpensive, it keeps for days, and it turns a plain snack into something that actually sustains you. Now, I promised you at the very beginning that number 4 was the one almost nobody thinks of as a fiber food, and here we are. Number 4 is flaxseed, and I want to be completely honest with you about its place in Scripture, because you deserve honesty over hype. Flax is woven all through the Bible, but as linen, the fine cloth spun from its stalks. The curtains of the tabernacle, the garments of the priests, the good wife of Proverbs chapter 31, who works willingly with flax in her hands, all of it points to this one modest plant that clothed the holy places of Israel. What the ancients used mainly for cloth, we have rediscovered as one of the most concentrated fiber foods on earth. Ground flaxseed carries an astonishing 27 grams of fiber per 100 grams, and it is one of the few plant sources of a particular kind of omega-3 fat, along with compounds called lignans that researchers continue to study with great interest. But here is the single most important thing I can tell you about flax, and please do not miss it. You must grind it. A whole flax seed is so small and so hard that it usually passes straight through you without giving up any of its treasure. Ground into a soft meal, though, it releases everything. Just 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed stirred into your morning oatmeal, your yogurt, or even a glass of water gives you a meaningful dose of fiber with almost no taste at all, just a faint, pleasant nuttiness. It is, I think, the quiet secret of this entire list. The same little seed that once clothed the temple, now nourishing the body from within. And that brings us to the final 3, the richest of them all, beginning with number 3. Number 3 is the lentil, and it comes with one of the most famous and most sobering meals in the entire Bible. 2 brothers, Jacob and Esau. Esau comes in from the fields, exhausted and ravenous, and Jacob is cooking a pot of red lentil stew. Esau is so overcome by hunger that he trades away his birthright, his entire inheritance as the firstborn son, for a single bowl of it, in Genesis chapter 25. It is a warning about appetite and impatience that has echoed for 3,000 years. But do not let the warning make you forget the food itself, because the lentil is one of the finest things you can put on your plate. A single cup of cooked lentils delivers around 15.5 grams of fiber, which for many people is more than half a day's worth in one serving, along with plant protein, iron, and folate. This is very likely close to the pulse that Daniel and his friends asked for at the start of our story, the humble food that left them healthier than the young men eating a king's rich table. For an older body, lentils are almost perfectly designed. They release their energy slowly and steadily. They support healthy cholesterol levels already in a normal range, and they are soft, easy to cook, and easy to digest. A simple pot of lentil soup with an onion, a carrot, and whatever herbs you love is one of the most nourishing and forgiving meals in the world, and it costs mere pennies a bowl. Esau gave up everything for one serving. You can have all its goodness for the price of a handful of change. And now, as promised, number 2, and the story I have been saving for you. Number 2 is the date, and to understand it, you have to understand that the land of milk and honey may not have meant bee honey at all. Many scholars believe the honey, so often praised in Scripture, was date honey, the thick, dark syrup pressed from this very fruit. Dates were so central to ancient Israel that the palm tree became a symbol of the nation itself, and the city of Jericho was known as the City of Palms. Now here is the story I promised you, and every word of it is true. In the 1960s, archaeologists digging at Masada, the great cliff-top fortress by the Dead Sea, found a small cache of ancient date seeds buried in the rubble, seeds that had last seen sunlight around 2,000 years ago in the time of Jesus. For decades, they simply sat in a drawer. Then, in 2005, a doctor and a scientist decided to try something that everyone assumed was impossible. They planted one, and it grew. A seed that had lain in darkness for 20 centuries pushed a green shoot up into the modern world, and they named that little tree Methuselah, after the man in Genesis who lived 969 years, the oldest life in all of Scripture. Years later, they grew female trees from other ancient seeds and pollinated them, and that resurrected bloodline of the long-lost Judean date, a variety that had vanished from the earth for something like 1,500 years, finally bore fruit again, and people tasted, for the first time in a millennium and a half, dates said to carry notes of honey and caramel. I find it hard to tell that story without a lump in my throat, because is that not the whole promise of Scripture in a single seed? That what looks dead and buried and finished can, in the right hands, live again? As for your body, dates are a wonderful natural source of fiber, with several grams in just a small handful, along with potassium and quick, clean energy, the kind that ancient travelers and soldiers relied on to cross the desert. My favorite suggestion ties our whole list together. Take a soft date, remove the pit, and tuck a single almond inside, the almond from all the way back at number 9. It is nature's candy, sweet and satisfying. But instead of empty sugar, it hands you fiber, minerals, and steady strength. Reach for 2 of those instead of a cookie, and you may never miss the cookie at all. Which leaves us, at last, with number 1, the single greatest biblical fiber food of them all. And it is not one food, but a recipe, dictated, of all people, by God to a prophet. Number 1 is the bread of Ezekiel. In the 4th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, in the 9th verse, God gives the prophet a very specific instruction. Take wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and spelt, he says, put them together in one vessel, and make bread of it, 6 different grains and legumes combined into a single loaf. Now, in its original setting, this was a survival bread for a time of hardship. But look at what it actually is through the eyes of everything we have learned today. Wheat and barley and spelt and millet, whole ancient grains, beans and lentils, the mighty pulses. God, in a single verse, written more than 2,500 years ago, dictated what may be the most complete plant food in the Bible, a combination that, taken together, provides all the essential building blocks of protein alongside a tremendous load of fiber, far more than ordinary white bread could ever dream of. And here is the beautiful part for you today. You do not have to grind 6 grains yourself. That very verse, Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 9, is now printed on loaves of sprouted whole grain bread sold in ordinary grocery stores, made from exactly those ingredients, often sprouted so the body can drink in their nutrients even more easily. It usually sits in the freezer section, and it makes the most wonderful toast, dense and nutty and deeply satisfying, the kind of slice that actually keeps you full through a long morning. Think of it as the crown of everything we have talked about: almonds and pomegranates, barley and figs, chickpeas and flax, lentils and dates. All of that ancient wisdom about fiber and nourishment gathered up into one humble loaf, whose recipe came straight from the pages of Scripture. So, let me bring us home. Remember that seed I promised you at the very beginning? The one that slept in the dark for 2,000 years and then rose to live again? I hope you see now why I saved it, because it is really the message underneath this entire list. The foods that restore us are not the newest, the trendiest, or the most expensive. They are the oldest. They are the seeds and grains and fruits that fed Ruth in the barley fields, that revived a fainting man in the desert, that strengthened a weary prophet under a lonely tree, that God Himself named and honored and even baked into bread. And the science of our own age, with all its instruments and its microscopes, and its study of the trillions of tiny lives within us, keeps arriving, a little breathless, at the same quiet truth those shepherds and prophets lived by. Real food, whole food, food full of fiber, is one of the kindest gifts we can give the bodies we have been entrusted with. None of these foods is a cure, and none of them replaces the care of the doctor who knows you and the medicine you may need. So please always let your own good sense and your physician guide you. But as a daily habit, as a gentle and faithful way of tending the body God gave you, this ancient table is as good as any you will ever find. If this has fed your spirit, as well as given you something to chew on, I would be so grateful if you would tap that like button. And if you are not yet subscribed, come join us, because there is so much more of this ancient wisdom still to share. And before you go, I would truly love to hear from you. So leave me an answer in the comments to this one simple question. Of all 9 of these foods, the almond, the pomegranate, the barley, the fig, the chickpea, the flaxseed, the lentil, the date, and the bread of Ezekiel, which one is already sitting somewhere in your kitchen right now? Today, tell me which one you have, and tell me whether it surprised you to learn it was in the Bible all along. I will be reading every single answer.